It seems everyone has a blog these days, from teens to seniors. Political critics, even politicians themselves, world observers, and world leaders. But what they all have in common is that the web is offering a place to air opinions, like a virtual diary. But unlike a personal journal, blogs can be read by a mass audience. Your words can cost you. More and more bloggers are winding up in court. If a blogger slams another person, creative work, or institution, should they be held liable? In recent years, there's been talk of creating blog insurance for individuals or businesses to defend themselves against online onslaughts. If anyone can pose as a citizen journalist, who has the burden of proof? Should bloggers be held to a certain standard, and does that violate the First Amendment? Today's technology is creating a new series of issues and demand for a clear-cut classification of what qualifies as protected speech. I'm joined by new media and technology attorney Daniel Pepper, Patrick Berzinski, communications director for Stevens Institute of Technology, and Dr. Clyde Bentley from the University of Missouri Journalism School. Thank you all so much for being here. Dan, I want to start with you. Let's clarify. Do bloggers have the right to say anything they want to online?
I think it's safe to say that bloggers have the same rights that most other folks would have if they're going to be publicizing their comments in more traditional media outlets like newspapers, radio, etc. The rules that would apply in those situations typically would also apply in the blogging world as well. Okay.
We all want to think we're kind of anonymous and, we work our 9 to 5, we go home, maybe we rewrite some things, but the way technology is today, anything you do online can follow you. How do you separate your public life, your work life, and what you want to say online?
Well, basically you embrace the idea that anonymity is no longer possible. And indeed, I think a lot of folks in my field of PR advise their clients to essentially get into the social media and new media age. And at the same time, of course, listen to their professional advisors, such as myself, to keep a measured form of communication at the same time.
It seems like such a fine line. One day you're writing, and all of a sudden, unbeknownst to you, you're giving away company secrets.
That is always a danger, I think, no matter what communications area you're working in. However, now, of course, it is online, and you have to be more mindful of that. So.
Well, how seriously should we be taking what we're reading online? Well, let's take a look. Joseph Rago of the Wall Street Journal, in a controversial op-ed piece, borrowed Joseph Conrad's quote and said blogs are written by fools to be read by imbeciles. Conrad was speaking of newspapers when he made that statement, but Rago says today's blogs fall far short of anything close to journalism. He says the blogs are not as significant as their self-endeared curators would like to think. Journalism requires journalists. Bloggers ride along the mainstream media like remora fish on the bellies of sharks, picking at the scraps. Now, Clyde, this is where I want to bring you into this. You specialize in convergence journalism.
Right.
Rago says journalism requires journalists. But what about the citizen journalists?
Well, I think what's happening is the definition of journalism is certainly growing. Truth on the web you have to realize, is not immediate. It is vetted by thousands of editors to read out there, and you get changes right away. I think what's happened here is we have a group of people who are content creators, and the social change we're seeing is that truth is no longer being defined by the content provider. It's being defined by the readers. They look at multiple sources and decide which truth they are going to believe, or what is truth. That requires a lot of critical thinking, and that's not really all that bad for society.
Not bad for society, but, kind of bad sometimes for folks who are trying to protect a brand. Because if there's all sorts of content out there, how do you really get out there and kind of counterbalance what's being said?
To some degree, you fight fire with fire, as I think a lot of folks in my profession now agree. Many folks in public relations are advising CEOs to start their own blogs. It could be a little dangerous, but there are also organizational blogs that are suggested very frequently to where you can post instantly and respond to something that might be defamatory or potentially damaging in some way. And I think the embrace of the new media really is one of the major answers to that problem.
Now, at this point, that sounds like that could be very dangerous for both the company, if the CEO's out there blogging. It could also be very dangerous for anyone out there writing about a company, a person. Is this where blog insurance kind of steps in?
Well, it certainly can. I think the question becomes really, what are you insuring? As with any insurance policy, there's always exclusions, there's exceptions, and I think in this new area of insurance, I think it's pretty unclear at this point what types of communications are protected. Does there need to be damage? What needs to be shown and proven in order for an insurance policy to pay any proceeds out? And I think that's yet to be determined.
We're hearing about this, and people at home, you know, folks who go on every night and just share their thoughts on things. Should they be nervous about this? Is this just something everyone should have?
I don't think so. I mean, I think there's certainly a very strong presumption of our First Amendment free speech rights, whether you're talking about blogging or any other form of communication. Clearly, as I think it's been mentioned by the other panelists, your audience is so much wider now when you're blogging, and of course the damage that can be done is much greater as a result of the wider audience. So at the end of the day, I think there's a modicum of common sense that needs to be embodied with any communications, and if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, at the end of the day, I think we know what the answer is.
Well, it's getting a little bit more difficult now when you're reading blogs to tell what is a duck, what isn't a duck. Let's take a look at paid bloggers.
The promise of money for a mention. Today's bloggers can get paid for dropping lines about products and services. The ads are everywhere. The process is leaving many to wonder if it's ethical or just the latest trend in online advertising.
Okay, from the PR standpoint, is this okay? Is this a great way, kind of cost-effective, to get a brand name out there, or is this shady?
It's just a new form of marketing, actually, where in the past you would have man-on-the-street interviews with people who might have been prepped. You now have online pre-prepped folks basically taking money for the same purpose to add a dimension of credibility.
Now you're talking about man-on-the-street interviews. We're going back to traditional journalism. Clyde, this would never fly in honest journalism, right? Does this make your head spin, or are we just expecting too much out of people writing these blogs?
Well, it's what happens in magazines every day. I mean, they have product placement in magazines all the time. It's just a matter of definition. I think what you're seeing here is a reaction to the fact that online journalism is not very profitable at all. Most of us are losing money at it. And so we're scrambling to try to take the place of all those very lucrative print and broadcast ads. It's a change. I don't particularly like it myself, but we get changes in the media all the time, so maybe we'll have to live with it.
Well, how are we going to know what to believe? What really is the truth?
How do we know now? I mean, the point is what I was trying to say before. You don't get handed the truth on a silver platter anymore. You get to go to multiple sites, multiple places, and look at different stories or different ads, and then make the decision yourself. That's a little harder on the reader, but it's probably good for them.
Well, what do bloggers have to lose? If a journalist gets found out, they lose their credibility. What happens to a blogger?
People don't read them. You got to remember, blogs are very poorly read. The internet is not a mass medium. It's a massively delivered niche medium. So if you lose your niche, you're ineffective.
What do you think, Dan? Should there be some form of disclosure here?
Well, I think it depends on what area we're talking. If we're talking about the product marketing, I think there needs to be a better job being done in certain consumer protection areas. Right now we have the Federal Trade Commission stepping in and saying, here's what you can say in advertising, here's what you can't say, and here's what's going to happen if you step over the line. Should this be in the blogging world as well? I think it should. I don't think we're seeing it yet, but as we're seeing more of the paid blogging that you've mentioned, I think it's only a matter of time before that steps up.
Well, we've been spending so much time talking about the business side of things. What happens when things get personal?
Celebrity gossip blogs make their money by bad-mouthing, but don't try this at home. It's easy to write something negative under the cloak of anonymity or even under the impression of free speech, but blogger beware. The U.S. courts are seeing more blog-related lawsuits each year.
Dan, if you had one bit of advice to give to people who want to go online, whether they're 10-year-old kids writing about their teachers, anyone, what would you suggest?
I would say make sure you're telling the truth. If you're not going to tell the truth, be prepared for the consequences. Defamation is a real problem. As I mentioned earlier, whether it's in the newspaper or the radio, it's the same rules that apply, and obviously a 10-year-old has a much easier time going onto a blog and saying these things. It's okay to speak your mind and give an opinion. If you're going to start lying or you're going to start saying things that you're not sure are the truth and may harm somebody, I think that's a good time to start wondering whether you should post it.
Clyde, we're talking about the truth in journalism school. You go out, you learn how to write the truth. But journalists are also equipped with some other skills that most writers just don't have. They kind of get a background in communications law, in some ethics. What kind of standards do you think any standards should be taught in schools?
Well, if you're talking about journalism schools, we teach general standards of truth and transparency. Unfortunately, most schools, universities in general, don't require an ethics class. But I think the idea of ethics is good. It's not a rule, but it's the idea that there are certain things that are good for you and good for society. But he was right. Truth. If you can tell the truth, you're not going to get nearly as much problems if you don't.
Should there be some kind of, netiquette for kids here to teach younger people, teens, younger kids, just not even necessarily the journalism side of things, but really you have to do this the right way? Well,
that's happening all the time. Most schools have programs. The Facebook is huge here, and the discussion about ethics comes on Facebook all the time. One of the major things there is you can post a photograph of someone without their permission, and they like to post unflattering photos. Well, that's becoming an issue. Personally, I would like to see some sort of minor libel court, something below our court system now, so you can have some way of complaining and say, you've done me wrong on the web, and I'd like to at least have it taken off.
Kind of arming folks with what they need to know. And I see you shaking your head. What do you think?
Well, yeah, the whole question, I guess, now is what is a public figure? Because that has generally defined the libel laws, I think, until very recently when things have gotten a little gray. And with everybody basically gone global via the Internet, there is some question now, I think, that needs to be defined as to who can be more easily libeled than another person.
Well, that in and of itself, I think it's a huge debate, and I would love to stay here and be able to talk about that. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and I only have time for one more question, 10 seconds each. Are anti-libel measures stifling free speech? What do you think, Dan?
I think we're actually seeing a trend towards greater protection of free speech, in my opinion. So I'm personally not in favor of strengthening anything that we have now. I think there needs to be a recognition in today's environment of the Internet. Free speech is here to stay.
What do you think?
I agree with Dan. Traditionally, it's very hard to prove libel, and I believe the courts have generally followed that position. I think they're going to continue to follow that position.
And Clyde, are we safe?
Yeah, I agree that the current libel laws work pretty well. We might have some way of just informal discussion about when someone feels they've been impugned, but other than that, I think the system works well rather than regulations of content.
Well, thank you so much. Dr. Clyde Bentley, University of Missouri Journalism School, Patrick Berzinski, and Dan Pepper, thank you so much for being here and taking part.
A pleasure.
Thank you. It was fun.